welcome positive disruptors. I've been told by some of these folks that I'm a little too American, so I apologize for that in advance. But how many of us think that we need to accelerate gender equity?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And we need more than just disruption, we need positive disruption. So I am Mim Senft, I'm the CEO of Global Women for Wellbeing. Welcome. Very quickly, our disruptive model is about taking things out of silos. We need pay equity, we need healthcare equity, so that we can have leadership equity. And for too long, we keep putting these things in boxes instead of using systems thinking to move this forward faster. We are research-based, and we are happy to send this to anybody who would like to see it, because our question back in 2016 was, and I am obviously not a youngster, why hasn't this moved forward? Why don't I have pay equity? And so a group of us came together that were researchers, businesswomen, leaders in our communities, and said, we want to dig a little deeper. And what we came to the conclusion, clearly it's a lot more complex than it's usually played out to be. But if anybody's going to tell you that they can do heart surgery in 15 minutes, this is the same kind of thing. We're not going to solve gender equity in 15 minutes. But if we start to understand all the pieces, we can start to be more disruptive. So I appreciate your voice and your attendance here, and I am looking forward to hearing you speak and share your opinions. So it is my pleasure now to introduce Amanda Scott. And Amanda is the Global Mergers and Acquisition Leader and GW4W board member and a dear friend. I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Min, and welcome to all of you. It is a pleasure to be here. And as I mentioned in my social media post on LinkedIn, it's rare that all the stars align, and tonight is one of those nights where it's a topic that's very close to my heart. We're bringing together my favorite employer, WTW, my favorite business school, BAYS, and my favorite board appointment and charity, GW4W. So it's just remarkable to be here with all of you. And we hope this is quite interactive. We want to make sure that you have a voice throughout the evening as well, because it's going to take all of us to address this issue. So welcome. So on that note, I'd like to introduce Lillian Mendez, the first Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, DEI, at BAYS Business School. It is her role to champion DEI values, develop the school's strategy on inclusion, and support colleagues. She was instrumental in widening access to scholarships that have attracted female students to the business school. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Amanda. Hello, everybody, and welcome to City University of London. It is great to see you all at this fantastic event, Positively Disruptive, Women Changing the World, which we at BAYS Business School are delighted to have here as part of our drive to foster diversity and inclusion at our school and beyond. As some of you may not know of us, I will just take a little bit of time to tell you something about our school. BAYS Business School, formerly CAS, is located in the City of London. It is part of City University of London, where we are now, and has been at the forefront of business education for over 50 years. It is a global leader and educates around 4,500 students per year, from undergraduates to PhDs, MBAs, and executive education. It has over 50,000 alumni across 160 countries, so we are a global community. We equip our students with knowledge, skills, and resilience to be ready to succeed in their career. Therefore, diversity, equity, and inclusion are core to what we do. We ensure we develop and disseminate research that leads the conversation on diversity, leadership, the future of work, and new forms of organizations. We encourage applications from underrepresented groups and offer scholarships to provide access to students who fulfill core academic criteria, but do not necessarily have to use to study at base. Starting at induction, our students and staff participate in inclusive team working workshops. We regularly deliver skill-based workshops and events from our organizations can enable support gender balanced leadership. Since 2017, our Global Women Leadership Program has provided 34 scholarships for high potential female students across our different programs. And perhaps some good news is that we're very close to a gender balanced leadership. At the moment, 5 out of 11 in our base leadership team are female. We know we've been striving to play an active part in building a safe, just, humanitarian, equitable, and sustainable future. However, there remains a long way ahead to achieve these objectives. Globally, a significant proportion of women do not have equal access to the labor market. Some are still risking their lives for their basic rights. And within the privileged minority of women leaders, like most of us here, there is frustration with the pace and progress. So how are we changing the world? So we now hear about gender pay gaps, what may be required to be positive and disruptive, and how we may close the gender equity leadership gap. These are complex issues, but I'm sure that we'll learn from today's speakers and feel comfortable to join the important discussion that follows. I hope you will all enjoy this evening. This space is yours. Thank you.
So we want to just kind of level set. We are data-driven, and I am delighted to introduce Elizabeth Bachrach. She's a population health strategist and co-founder of Sable Advisory Services, advising SMEs in human capital management to achieve community-level impact across the business ecosystem. She has also had a program strategy with Business for Health in the UK, catalyzing and facilitating business contributions to reduce health inequities and increase healthy life expectancy. And Elizabeth, I am very proud to say, is a GW4W advisory board member, so I turn it over to Elizabeth.
Double it. Whatever effort you're applying to the world's biggest challenges, like gender equality, increase it exponentially if you want any hope of delivering an adequate response. At a panel on multilateral approaches to complex problems at the UN General Assembly a few weeks back, Susanna Malcora, president and one of the co-founders of Global Women Leaders Voices for Change and Inclusion, summed up her position by borrowing this phrase, and she heard this the night before at an event on women's empowerment. Let's take this as our first call to action tonight. According to the World Economics Forum Global Gender Gap Report from this year, at the current rate of progress, does anybody know how long it will take to reach full parity? Shout it out. It will take 132 years to reach full parity. This includes women's representation in positions of power and decision making. If we look at the latest progress on SDG 5, Sustainable Development Goal, Gender Equality, only 47% of data is currently available to assess and understand what's happening in this landscape. This renders women and girls effectively invisible. The numbers can be imprecise and variable, but they're based on hard, undeniable data like health outcomes and economic participation, educational attainment, and political empowerment. Accelerating parity must be a core part of everyone's agenda. So as Mim said, we have to ask harder questions. Why is equality still generations out of reach? How do we dig deep to overcome these magnified divisions, to find shared objectives, shared values, and fight for dignity and justice? If we look at the workforce, gender gaps are driven and affected by many factors, including long-standing structural barriers, socioeconomic and technological transformation, as well as economic shocks, and the pandemic didn't do us any good. According to McKinsey, women are feeling more burned out than ever before, even as productivity increases across and record high levels. And it's women who are stepping in and helping to lead this burst in productivity. Across industries, there's significant variation in the rates of hiring women into leadership. And for LGBTQ+ women and women of color, the barriers to success and advancement are even steeper. On average, though, more women were hired into leadership in industries where women were already highly represented. If we're talking about strengthening female leadership in industry at all levels, hiring more women at the entry level is an important component of closing those gender gaps, but it is not fully sufficient. Professor Ingrid Hegel out of Munich calls this the broken rung rather than a glass ceiling. In her critical research published this summer, she examines why women at lower hierarchy levels are 29% less likely to apply for promotions, where no such gaps exist among employees who already hold leadership positions. If leaders can develop unified promotion criteria that factor in a variety of skills to properly account for these leadership qualities that women bring to the table, this can help combat biases towards certain attributes and create more equitable assessments come promotion time. Hegel's findings suggest that the current architecture of leadership positions is an impediment to equal representation. Therefore, adjustments to leadership design and what team responsibility looks like can really help to reduce female underrepresentation in leadership. This gives us another great action to think about: how policies that increase the share of first level leadership that require only limited responsibility for a team can likely help to reduce that bottleneck in women's career progression on those lower rungs. How might you redesign leadership architecture in your organization? In closing, I'm taking words from Melinda Gates in her Goalkeepers report around the SDGs this year. So when it comes to the future of progress, not just on the global goals related to gender equality, but those on good health, quality education, ending poverty, and more, there is one engine that can drive them all: women's power. Gender equality depends on women having power, not just empowerment. How then does empowerment make sure women are actually gaining power in their families and communities as well? What might be possible? And what might be positively disruptive? I look forward to the rest of the evening with you all, and I welcome back Amanda to introduce the keynote for tonight. Thank you.
So I'd like to introduce Rachel McCann, our first keynote speaker. Rachel leads WTW's Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, or DEI Solutions, visiting us from Philadelphia, PA, in the US. She's responsible for developing and evolving WTW's DEI solutions, working with hundreds of experts to help organizations integrate DEI into their talent, business, and ESG strategies on a single and multi-country basis. DEI areas of focus are pay equity, career, inclusive benefits, well-being, financial resilience, and my personal favorite, M&A. So what a perfect alignment to why we are here today: Global Women for Well-Being. And Rachel has 2 teenage children, Luke and Emily, and is technically a newlywed after marrying her partner Dave almost 8 years after their first date, and has a whiskey, an English bulldog at home, who looks forward to being a big brother to his biological brother, Bourbon, who comes home in a few weeks. Rachel is going to present some incredible insights from WTW research in partnership with the World Economic Forum on wealth equity. Welcome.
And I have to laugh
laugh because legitimately it's whiskey and bourbon. And whiskey's favorite place as an English bulldog is sitting next to a Jack Daniel's barrel. So can't make this stuff up. So absolutely pleased to be here. And it's really interesting. When Mim was talking and doing her introduction, she was basically talking about my job, which has really evolved. And when we talk about these statistics and the data and what we learned, what's been really fascinating is and I was saying this earlier, if we rely on society to make all of the change, we're going to be waiting not 132 years, which is how I knew the data point because of our joint research, but far longer. And several years ago, it was really clear that employers had an opportunity, including universities as an employer, and supportive students as well, to have an impact. So as we go through this conversation, part of the lens that I'm going to be bringing to is exactly that impact, that organizations who can drive massive change and influence insurers and governments and alike to drive change. So, another data point, upon retirement, women will only have 74% accumulation of wealth. That's a really scary number. And when we did the joint research with the World Economic Forum, we were looking at family status, career progression, and the like to really understand what were the drivers behind that. But when I saw that number, part of me was terrified. Part of me, sadly, wasn't surprised, and thinking about own life path and those of others I've known. And when we think about the contributors to that, retirement obviously becomes a huge component. And when we think about women, and we'll talk about the pandemic in a minute, women often take the primary caregiving role. And McKinsey has done some great research over the years as well of also looking at, so how does that evolve? And I think they did it with Leaned In, but where did they look at, even in LGBT relationships, women, there is more equal share, but still the burden is even greater. When you look at the data and look at, from an ethnic perspective, where do different ethnicities, whether it's Hispanic or otherwise, multi-generational households, and how does that take away from women being in the workforce and having access to benefits and retirement alike? When we think about some of the other not risk factors, but ability to manage risk, just a raise of hands. As we were growing up in our different countries, obviously from America, but what sort of education, financial education, did anyone get? Did you learn how to balance a checkbook? Well, when people knew what checkbooks were, right? What about saving for the future? Okay, so those who can't see, one male hand. Okay, we got a little bit more, but still, that's the point. And when we exacerbate that and think about jobs available to women, that's part of the foundational problem. The pandemic. So the pandemic, I have a perspective around it, but how many times did you hear, prior to the pandemic onset, caregiving being a topic discussed outside of family and friends? Okay. What about childcare duty or caring for elders? So there's the child piece, and when all the schools shut down, no one talked about the elderly family member. It became somewhat, I have two teenagers, which were really fun during the pandemic, 2 years at home. But we didn't talk about our loved ones who were disabled. We didn't talk about our loved ones who were in nursing homes. It wasn't acceptable. We didn't talk about money. We didn't talk about the financial strain and what you had access to. And I'm a glass half full person. For anyone who knows me, I will find the bright side of anything bad that happens. And although the pandemic hurt women in many ways, the positive, and I believe this is true for men and those who don't identify as men or women alike, it lifted the shield and lifted the cover on issues that people are dealing with at home. Was it always acceptable to talk about those things? No, there was covering, there was other things, and for women, I think it was even more so. Having two teenagers, I remember my favorite event was my mentor. Loved him to this day. He's one of my favorite people. 6 children at home. I had my first son who's 15. He said, so when are you coming back from maternity? In 3 weeks? Like, no. He called me at home while I was out on leave, and actually HR had to step in. Kind man, supportive. He had 5 girls. Supportive, wife, wonderful, but he didn't understand. And that was 15 years ago. And I was pregnant and carrying all the PowerPoint, because we brought a lot of paper, because we go large or go home some days. And, I would be walking like this with my belly out, and he was carrying a coffee. I'll tell you, fast forward to after my second daughter, he's like, Rachel, just give me a bag. So I'm like, well, John, you can take my breast pump bag. How's that for you? He did, but it was an evolution, and there was 2 weeks paid parental leave. Yep. So, if we go to the next page, because I don't think you have the clicker. So let's think about the journey. The journey of life. We all have the journey of life, but maybe we didn't talk about it before. And again, I'm a glass half full. The pandemic has brought real life into situations and the expectation that someone's well-being is really important. But when we think about that from a gender perspective, I'll be honest and call my own life out here. There is the early career. And in the U.S., yes, it's different. Our student debt is astronomical, and it is crushing for many. And you think about just starting off. There's the debt there. You think about buying a house. Maybe you get into an entry-level job, but are you getting paid fairly at the beginning? And I'm pretty confident I wasn't, but what did you know in the late 1990s? But you think about, what does it mean then to buy a house, to start your life? These things happen, but guess what? If you're not planning, what happens if you get divorced and you're a woman and you decided to stay at home or work part-time for that job? What happens if you have cancer and you are a single parent with 2 children? These things happen. And what we haven't necessarily prepared anyone in society for, and I would say even the newest generation, absent of gender, of like, what do you do about it? So the benefit of the pandemic is people talk about these life pieces now. They talk about mental health struggles. They talk about bias that's happening or discrimination that's happening, which is disruptive change, and it's uncomfortable. We're at a different point where we can actually talk about things that are uncomfortable and have support and have data. We never had data years ago to point to gender gap pay. We didn't have the data to talk about health disparities in a way that we do now. The piece that when we talk about health access and affordability, when we wind down that road or up that road, it's parental illness too. And where is there support both from an economic perspective and a social support perspective? And it's an amazing time because of the awareness, but it is also a very difficult time as we are in these financial crises. The pandemic still looms, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. But, actually, let's flip to the next page. Great and scary picture at the same time. So what you're looking at is part of the research with the World Economic Forum, the joint research. So the pieces that we looked at to let you know what actually went into this research. So when we did the research, we looked at what was the family support of women. What were the roles that they played? What were the life events that they had, whether it be that winding road of triumphs or also life defeats? What was their financial situation? What was their ability to retire? And when we talked about, we are 132 years gap. That's globally. It varies by country, as you can see. United Kingdom, 0.71 in terms of gender gap difference. Spain, you can see some of the countries, even within even the region, there are different places. They have different social structures, they have different governments, they have different legislation. I'm absolutely convinced these numbers can change, but they don't change on their own. And if we go to the next page. Thank you. So this is my job. My job is to think and convince the world, along with MIM and everyone else, how do we drive change? And I am convinced every single person, I joke sometimes, like everyone owns diversity, equity, and inclusion and making change, and no one owns it. Because the ownership has to be everyone. So really what you see here is a continuum. It's a snake, it's whatever you want to call it. But what are all the different points of interaction? And to orient you to our snake here, thinking about who. So sometimes in the DEI world, organizations really get stuck. I need to support my women. Okay, great. I need to support my LGBT employees. Great. I need to support those of different ethnicity. Absolutely. I need to support those who are disabled. Yes. What about the intersectionality? Because we're not one thing. No one is one thing. And as we think about the impact, how can we support equity across anyone who's disadvantaged? It could be income, it could be living in a rural area, but for women it's that much harder for those drivers that we covered before. So what are the different pieces? We talked about pay. Thank goodness there's legislation. Thank goodness there's greater disclosures required, but there is really that shift in movement needed from I'm going to be compliant within that range that I need to, versus I'm actually going to have pay parity. But how do I get there? What about career? I will say, when we talk about silos, and I love how you were talking about the silos, truly, those who have the greatest opportunity, they may not have the most money, but they will take the silos in which they can. So the benefits, the pay, thinking about career, not just who's hired in entry, but who's elevated to roles. What training is made available? When is the training made available? Is it made available to part-time work? Is it made available to someone who might start a factory and only have a high school degree? Thinking about representation with that. Are we thinking about the needs of everyone in the room? And I remember when, and there's a great slide we did not include, it's equal and equitable. And the number of, again, organizations, universities, it's like, oh, I offer everyone the same thing. I have equity. You don't. And this is just really an opportunity to think about when can you offer something the same, but it needs to reach someone in a different way. It needs to be accessible in a different way. Healthcare benefits is a great example. Mental health, universal issue. But what's made available and when? And thinking about culture. So when you think culture, do you think it's a thing, a feeling? If you think it's a feeling, raise your hand. If you have no idea what it is, raise your hand. But that's the point. And where we have, how does someone feel safe to speak up? Do they feel safe to ask for what they need? Do they feel safe to say, I actually can't be here because I need to go care for someone and I have something else in my life right now? And that's really important, and it doesn't mean I'm not committed to my job. And for women, getting to the point to being able to say that is about culture. And that's a culture with friends and colleagues and those that you just partner with and getting support from each other. The other pieces with that culture is also just having allies and mentors. And you will meet a mall, and a mall, despite what he says, supports and sponsors women in his own way. but you need that community, you need that group around you to lift you up, because when we think about disruptive change doesn't come from a thing, an event. It comes from all of us each day thinking about what can we do and what can we give back. So I thank you for the time and being open to the fact that you did not get Tammy, but you got me today. So, and we are grateful for that. Thank you. So appreciated. Caregiving. Yeah, for yourself, for children, and for adults. It is one of the major issues that still needs to be addressed, and we need to be talking about it a lot more. So we'll put that in the context of aging populations and aging workforce.
In the US, there are 70 million baby boomers. Who's taking care of them? How many women are going to have to stay at their jobs because they got hit by the financial meltdown and COVID? It's a crisis that is fast approaching us. And so I deeply appreciated you bringing up that piece. We're going to dive a little bit deeper now into our women's panel. And so let's get positively disruptive. We know the numbers are not good, but we are not going to wait 132 years, are we? No. So it is truly my pleasure to introduce Naz Shagan, who is going to be our moderator for the women's panel. She is the head of Wellbeing Strategy for GW4W Wellbeing, a company providing a proactive approach to supporting well-being. She was previously the head of health and well-being at IKEA for UK and Ireland. And Naz also sits on the leadership team for Let's Improve Workplace Wellbeing. Yes, we should. Bringing together like-minded well-being leaders to share and learn from best well-being practices, and contributes to the Global Wellness Institute's well-being initiative on workplace well-being. Lots of W's there, and that's where we met. Naz's experience covers a wide variety of areas, including well-being strategy, global well-being, standards of excellence, people analytics, financial well-being, employee engagement, and mental health. And she is a true female head, heart, hands leader. And as I turn the conversation over to you, and if the panelists would like to come up to the stage, that would be great.
Good evening, everyone. While we get everyone put their different speaker modes on, thank you for coming, and it's great to be here and be able to have such esteemed people in our midst, being able to speak about such important and key topics. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panel this evening. So we'll start out with Amanda Scott, who we've introduced quite a lot this evening, but I thought I'd go a step further, and besides being this dynamic global mergers and acquisition leader, I guess it's also just honing in as the CEO and founder of Mike's Mates, a mental health charity in the UK, and he's also a board member for Global Women for Wellbeing and the Diana Durante Ballet Company. So, apart from, leading a global team that helps, clients evaluate and address the critical people-related issues, assets, liabilities, and risks, she has enough time to do all of that as well. So pretty impressive. So thank you for joining us today, Amanda. We've got Hira Ali, who's an international leadership trainer and author. Hira is also a successful entrepreneur who has launched several businesses. I think top publications have included Harper's Magazine, Forbes, The Telegraph, and the list goes on. So I think I'll stop there, but really impressive. She's had a number of prestigious honors and awards, and in 2019 Hira released her first book entitled Her Way to the Top, A Guide to Smashing the Glass Ceiling. And I welcome on the panel Elizabeth as well, who you've heard from before. So thank you for filling in. Unfortunately, we had one of our panelists who's tested for COVID, so the C word is still out there, unfortunately. So I'm going to kind of dive in, and the purpose of this session, I guess, is for us to look at the positive disruption we have seen so far in terms of leadership, moving away from this traditional leadership qualities of showing a brave face, and instead, looking at that empathetic, vulnerable way of looking at leadership. We now celebrate it. It brings about new strengths. So coming to you, Amanda, I want you to kind of get your thoughts on, I guess, starting there. What do you think of leadership?
Yeah, so I think we have to be careful when we talk about leadership, because we do talk a lot about empathy and caring and being human and all the amazing leadership traits. But at the end of the day, the way you get access into the room is through financial success. So you need to have business acumen, you need to understand your business, you need to understand sales and revenue and P&Ls, and I think sometimes we overlook the criticality of, if that's even a word, of having those skills. And so I just want to make that very clear that if you want to get into the room and be a leader, you need to be successful in your business, no matter what that means, because people put you in a leadership role because of those skills. So my first leadership role, they had no idea how I would do as a leader, but they knew that I knew how to go to market. They knew I knew sales and revenue and the financial acumen for the role. And then what kept me in the role was the team and the empathy and the humans and the people and all of the joy and excitement that I had working with these incredible people over that time. So I just want to make sure that as we talk, especially as women, we don't lose sight of the fact that there are some really hard skills that we need to master to get access to those types of roles.
Thank you for that, and I think that resonates quite a lot. Thank you for the Kathy. Coming to you, I guess, Hera, is what do you think healthy leadership looks like? Especially when we're thinking the challenging traditional leadership, especially amongst marginalized groups.
Yes, so I think the pre-existing mythical standards and yardsticks with which we measure the effectiveness of leadership are no longer relevant, or even if they are relevant, they are changing. What leadership traditionally looked like and sounded like is changing. So as an Asian brown Muslim woman who's also an immigrant, I wouldn't be expecting myself to be in spaces like this or giving keynotes. But I guess the fact that I'm doing it shows that I think leadership has now become more inclusive, and particularly if you talk about female leadership traits such as empathy, and I know I'm going to talk about those other skills as well, empathy and compassion and humility and collaboration and process orientation has now become very important. And I don't want to make this a gender thing, but during COVID-19, we did see lots of articles around how women leaders were doing better. Why? Because they demonstrated empathy and they had compassion, but not to forget the hardcore skills. And Stanford did a research and they showed that women who actually combined male traits and technical skills alongside women-specific trends were promoted much faster. So it's not just women-specific strengths you need, you also need the hard technical skills, as Amanda said, and you need that confidence, you need that aggression. But I think gone are the days when we used to look down upon female-specific traits, because people are now increasingly talking about vulnerability. What healthy leadership looks like is that now leaders are more tuned in with their emotions, they're tapping into emotional intelligence, they're being authentic, they know they can make mistakes, they know they can, it's okay to not know everything, and it's not just about the expectations people have of leaders. I think leaders themselves are now prioritizing mental health. So I think that way leadership is changing and evolving.
Yeah, a really key point there. I think the landscape has changed as a result of the pandemic as well, accelerating a lot of that. We've seen that if you want people to follow you, you need to be one of those leaders that can do both.
Yes.
So I think it's quite vital. So coming to you, Elizabeth, to get your input, I guess, looking at your experience of working in local authority, and then the link between leadership and health and well-being.
Yeah, so I'm going to take a slightly different approach on this, and I think I'm going to emphasize the importance of quiet leadership. And I was having a conversation with my good friend who's here in the audience, Joe, last night about what leadership looks like. And sometimes it's not anything that looks like this, or it's not the rah-rah, or it's not presenting keynotes. And I resonate with this strongly because I believe it's a lot about impact and how you carry people with you and drive collective action. And one of the key foundations of how I work and advise with people and organizations is that the health and well-being of you and yourself and those around you, which then extends and has knock-on effects to your community, is so vital and necessary for all of us to thrive and flourish. So part of the bottom-up approach is looking a lot about what happens in the local community with a strengths-based approach and seeing what can be addressed from this grassroots approach. And I think that's so powerful because it allows us to find ways to address inequalities, inequities, and say what is happening here and who's in the community that can carry everybody forward because they're trusted, and they have the soft skills, they can be coached very easily on some of those hard skills perhaps, and really take a strengths-based approach, as I mentioned, to bringing people along so that we can do this together.
Thank you for that. I think the thing that resonated and came out from what you said is referencing, I don't know how many saw the World Health Organization guidelines on mental health that came out like last week, where they state, I guess the thing that resonated the most is business as usual will not do. And I think this is what we have to remember. And I think when it comes to leadership as well, the traditional way of leadership wasn't working, isn't working, especially when we look at retaining and recruiting talent. I guess that's when we're seeing a bit of a difference. So moving on, I guess coming back to you here, if we could share 3 key points of how leaders could be promoting psychological safety for men, women, non-binary people, marginalized groups, what would you say those 3 would be?
Gosh, I've written a book on this, so I could really speak a lot.
So let's take 3 for the audience.
So I usually say challenge yourself, challenge others, and challenge the organization culture. There's also the institution part, I'm going to leave that out. So when you are talking about challenging yourself, I think as leaders, to create psychological safety, we need to make sure we don't assume and generalize in cluster groups. So all marginalized groups have their unique identities. Just because they're marginalized, they have common things and common barriers, but just because an Asian woman or a black woman belong to a racially diverse community doesn't mean the challenges are going to be the same. So I respect the unique identities, do not assume. If you don't know, ask questions, do surveys, find out what it is that they want, and then take action. So ask, do not assume, ask, and take action. These are 3 points, but in action, if I can be a little cheeky, I'll add a few points very quickly. That's when you're taking action, make sure that you are tackling microaggressions, you are making the space safe enough for everybody to voice out what they want, and looking at it from an intersectional point of view, how sometimes some groups face multiple challenges which are so intertwined that it's very difficult to differentiate where one begins and the other ends. So that would be mine.
Thank you. And then coming to you, Amanda, I guess in some of the conversations we've had, I think looking at role modeling and how passionate you are through your career, how have you created that space and created the opportunities? What challenges have you faced?
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't write a book on this. This is my perspective. Yes. I love the concept of mosaic role modeling. So I think oftentimes we pick the wrong people to be role models for us. We find people who are like us, and then we want to be like them.
Sure.
And you're not always going to find a perfect person. I do not know one single perfect person. And if they're so alike to you, are you learning from them, truly learning from their different perspective and their diversity? So when I think about role models, I like to think about what are the skill sets that I admire in this individual that I don't have. So maybe someone who's brilliant at negotiating. Hey, can you be my mentor for 6 months? I want to really understand how you negotiate. I want to see how you do it, and I want to be in the room, and I want to learn the skills. Maybe someone who's brilliant at financial modeling. Hey, that's a really impressive tact that you have. Or someone who can speak up in a meeting room or give a presentation. I think it's finding the pieces of people that make you inspired, piece it all together into a mosaic of who you want to be as a leader, because you do want to be different. And I do find that it does help if you look up the organization and there isn't anyone that looks like you or sounds like you or is you. It is helpful. And I know as an introvert, I find these types of things terrifying, and I always found them quite terrifying because it was just a huge hurdle to get in front of people and share my perspective. So I found the introverts out there, and I asked, so how do you go up there and do this? how do you find who's authentically you on a stage? And how do you stick to that authenticity? So find people that inspire you and learn little pieces from them and pull that into your toolkit of who you are and how you want to be.
Some really great reflections there. I think there's one question that I'm going to ask each one of you, and I'll start off with you, Elizabeth, is what piece of advice would you give to another female aspiring to a leadership role?
I was given this this advice actually just a couple of weeks ago by one of my fellow colleagues in this room, and she said, "Just be yourself." And it's humbling because as we aspire to learn from people and pick up different qualities, I think that's brilliant, and it makes us complete and reflective about the gaps that we might need to fill. But we do know ourselves best, and that also means striving to fill any gaps that we want to fill, but that also requires reflection time. And so my biggest piece of advice after listening to yourself is taking the time to sit and reflect on everything that is in our face all the time. There's so much stimuli that exists in this world. We're raising children, we're caring for families, we're caring for elders. Things, as everybody mentioned tonight, things happen that are sometimes out of our control. So being able to find the pause in our daily life, and even if it's just a moment, and that goes back to tuning into knowing yourself.
Thank you for that. And then coming to you, Amanda, and then I'll end with you, Vicky Hill. What advice would you give?
I want to underline the being self-aware, because I think that is the foundation of growth. And my favorite saying is, what makes you odd will make you great. And I think it's embracing your weirdness, it's embracing the uniqueness that is you, and the skill set that is you, and recognizing that you are bringing that value every time you enter that conversation, and finding confidence in your weirdness. So I used to go into every performance review, and I know my team have heard this story, every performance review and say, what am I doing badly? How can I get better? And I would focus so much on the negative, and I really just try to hone those skills and get better. And my boss one day said, well, there's a lot of good stuff here too. Let's go back and let's reread your feedback, and let's really absorb what people are saying are your strengths. And it was around client focus and strategic thinking, the ability to turn strategy into action. And so when I took that moment to reflect, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't just keep ignoring those skills. Maybe if I work on those skills, that's what's going to make me great. I'll continue to build and get better at all of these other things, but hey, I could actually be quite good at this, and I actually enjoy that part better. So I think just recognizing that what makes you odd will make you great, and embrace the weirdness.
Thank you. And then finally?
Right, so keeping in line with self-reflection, self-awareness, what I would say is slightly different, but it's about self-advocacy, because I think women really do shy away from projecting themselves out in the world. They will think it's too salesy to talk about themselves, and they will often not apply for opportunities. I usually promote self-advocacy a lot because honestly I didn't have a choice. I'm originally from Pakistan. I moved from Pakistan to UAE, then from UAE I moved to UK. So every time I moved, I had to build my leadership brand from ground zero, and a 4-time post-COVID. So this is what I tell myself, that I enjoy doing self-advocacy, even though it sometimes feels uncomfortable. But yes, honestly speaking, this is what has helped me in developing my brand over the last 6 years, particularly in UK. I think what women do is they fall for the tiara syndrome. They do the hard work and they wish that somebody's going to come and place the tiara on your head. And unfortunately that never happens, so you have to go and grab that tiara yourself. So self-advocacy is important.
There's so many things I want to say there, but I will leave it at there because there's certainly like images went through my head. But nonetheless, I'll leave it there. We do have the next 5 minutes or so, and I just wanted to open it up, I guess, to the floor and see if there was anyone that wanted to ask the question of one of our panelists. Oh, okay, one went up. Okay.
I just wanted to ask, you've spoken a lot about what women can do, which is great, and what people should do for themselves. What can men do? What can we do? How can we help as well?
Is about to be and you will probably hear a lot about that, but I think yes, it's really important for men to step up and support women, because I do believe that we live in a world, whether we like it or not, we do live in a world which has been designed by men and for men, and we are living in countries, irrespective of whichever country we live in, we are living in a world where men do occupy dominant positions, top leadership positions throughout. So I think it's really important for men to step up as allies, and what they're going to do is something which they will discuss in the next panel, I suppose.
I feel very strongly about sponsorship. So the people in the room making the decision need to actively sponsor women or people of diverse backgrounds. And just challenge the thinking, oh, well, they shouldn't go for this promotion because they have all this at home. And I think just continually making sure that you're sponsoring a promotion and really understanding a business case for a promotion so that you can accurately represent that person in the decision-making room is the number one thing I think that in the corporate world a man can do for a woman. And I spend a lot of time promotion coaching, so if we have someone going up for a very senior role, I make sure that they talk to every single person that's going to be in that room that would be a great ally or speaker for them. So I think representing people that aren't there is the best thing that a man can do in that environment.
She was saying.
Yes, so I want to remark on women's emissions in the workplace and gender equality on that front in terms of leadership, because to me, I don't think we're there. We haven't bothered at all in terms of women being able to express their emotions as women in the workplace and not be doubly judged. So I wondered what you thought we could do to bring that psychological safety and that sort of balance about, you should be able to be vulnerable.
Sorry,
That's part of your book, isn't it?
Chapter 3.
Come on.
Chapter 4. Get my book. No, just kidding. So I think it's a very good question. I do believe that that's where allies will really help. So if you are in a meeting, for example, where you are being continuously talked over and you are, of course, you need that confidence to step up and take that person aside and tell them this is what you're doing and call out the microaggression directly. But for some reason, if you're not able to directly confront, I think that's where allies step in, and allies, not necessarily men, irrespective of their gender, who can back you up, who can amplify your voice, who can support you. So that's really important. And how to be vulnerable, I must say that it is good to be vulnerable, but we also need to be careful, because not everything can be shared. If it's not relative to the organization cultural context, it might backfire. So be yourself, but carefully.
I wasn't quite sure how to phrase this question, but so being strong leaders, female leaders, through your careers you must have dealt with the alpha male in the room. I kind of want to ask if there's a particular experience that you could share, how you would deal with a strong male alpha, in the room who's kind of blocking you, and how would you deal with that? Any advice?
Well, so I have an example from a few weeks back, actually. I do a lot of research, and I have to explain my research, and I have to make conclusions about the research. And oftentimes it's complex, as you saw from the presentation earlier, so it can be hard to interpret. However, a few weeks ago, this gentleman, I'll call Nafamal, sure. Basically repeated what I said, and then everybody's like, oh, okay, now I understand, right? And so a question for me is, am I explaining myself well? That was my first thought that ran through my head. Maybe I need to think about it a little bit differently. And then I reflected back and I was like, no, this was a white middle-aged man that was presenting information back to another white middle-aged man. And that it hurt, and it really was not, it was not beneficial to my confidence. There's me being vulnerable, I'll share that right there. And so what I think, I don't know that I have an actual response except to say and be able to reflect again with people that I trust and care about and can give me the feedback that I need to say, to coach me. And this goes back to what type of skill set do I need to cultivate to understand how to respond. And then perhaps next time I can call it out in the meeting right then and there and reflect back and say, is there a way that I could have presented that differently that it would have come across? And we all need to understand that sometimes there's clarifying messages and that's fine. But ultimately, if we feel strong enough and safe enough to call it out in the moment, that's going to get us somewhere because it will set an example.
I find oftentimes aggression comes from a place of insecurity. And so I find if I sit there and I listen and I try to really understand where they're coming from, often I can get a nugget of information of, okay, so he doesn't understand this or she doesn't understand where we're coming from for this. So let me really think that through and help them understand what we're doing here. But I think you've seen it where I go in with facts. You just stick to the facts. This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. And I think it's keeping your cool. I had it happen when I got promoted to senior partner. I had a gentleman say, oh, well, you were just promoted because you're a diversity statistic. And I said, well, actually, I think it was promoted because I bring in 5 million of new business every year. Maybe when you get that much new business, you'll get promoted too. And we just kind of shut it down. But it's important because in those moments, I freeze up. So I have my go-to phrases that will shut other people down because it does happen and it happens a lot. So I have my confident statements that I can go to because again, as an introvert, there's a lot happening. And so I need to be able to have like my go-to phrases. So I think of your PowerPoints when you are feeling your most vulnerable so that you can jump to them and run.
I think you basically answered my question in the last 4 answers. I want to know how you navigate the kind of the ruthlessness and the competition internally. I think, especially as an introverted person, and obviously someone very, I assume extrovert, I mean ruthless yourself. I'd just like to know how you kind of navigate that.
Oh, okay.
Or really well.
This is chapter 7. We're getting away.
That's not covered in my book. So I think yes, I am an extrovert, but when I do get confronted, I am vulnerable. I also freeze like you. So it doesn't mean that I have these, I think practicing in advance really helps. When I started working back in my own country, I was working with 22 men, and I was the only woman in the department, and there was a lot of competition, there was a lot of patronizing, and I think it took me time. It didn't come naturally because this was, 17 or 18 years back. But yeah, I think it is important to confront because my personality is such that I can't let it go. And not in a bad way, because I feel that if it is affecting my personal brand, then I have to tackle this. And what I need to then choose is whether I need to confront this publicly or whether I need to confront this privately, whether I need to confront this at the spot or whether I need to confront this later on, but I will confront. So depending on the situation and depending on how I would evaluate the situation, I would then go on to deal and confront. And as Amanda said, I also have practiced phrases, which my go-to phrases, which I could use. So yeah.
I would just like to say, turn that competition into collaboration. We are going for the same goals. We have the same objectives. We have to do this together. We're not competing. Let's collaborate.
Yes.
Thank you so much to the panelists for all the great insight, etc. And thank you for the audience for getting involved. I think we could take another 10 minutes of more questions, but we'll end it there. Thank you so much.
So, we've already heard a lot. We're going to take care of our own health and well-being and take a quick break. So please get a glass of water, stretch a little bit. It's very interesting, before I let you go, when I listen to this and about being confident in who you are and being able to stand up in very difficult situations sometimes, and how we support each other, because I think this is the other big piece of the puzzle here. How do we support each other? It's not just about what you do internally, but when you see something happening to somebody else, how are you lifting them up? We cannot do this if we are not grounded in our own health and well-being. And that truly is financial, as Rachel shared, mental and physical health, and a healthier connection to the purpose that we have in life. Is it just about making money? Or are we leaders that are going to lead us to a future where we truly have more sustainability? And so I'm going to leave you with that thought to go and talk amongst yourselves and come back, because the next section is going to be about you. And we want to get you involved in this conversation, because we know there is wisdom in this room, and we always learn when we open up this discussion. You're going to hear from some truly amazing male leaders, and it is not easy to find men that are doing this type of work. So I am deeply grateful, and I'm going to say it again when they get up, for being here to share that. And we want you to think about this. Think about this idea of what positive disruption means for you. So go get a drink and meet us back here in, I'm going to say 7 minutes, because we went a little bit over. Thank you. Out there. Anybody learn anything? Meet somebody new? Still eating? That's okay. So we're going to jump into the second half, and as I said, this is really about your voice and adding to the conversation. At everything at GW4W, we encourage you to not sugarcoat your words. You don't have to do that here, even though the mic just went out on me. We want you to be as open and as honest as you can be, because if we cannot do that, we cannot solve the problems that we are trying to solve. We cannot close this gap. So to lead this incredible conversation, I am delighted to introduce Dionne Johnson. She is a board-level leadership strategist to women in leadership. She is also an ex-midwife and director in public services, where she pioneered, coordinated, and led special services serving highly vulnerable and marginalized client groups. Dionne is a multi-award-winning women's champion with the re-empowerment of women, I like that, re-empowerment, of women on boards at the heart of her work. And I am honored that she is a GW4W advisory board member. Her clients are chief executives, directors, and heads across sectors, and she recently released a wonderful book. I highly recommend it. Influential Woman, A Fresh Approach to Tackling Inequity and Leading Change at Work, that has received very positive reviews from all of us that have read it from around the world. So with that, please welcome Dionne.
When I read my bio, I'm really proud of the fact that I was a midwife, because nobody can tell me that women aren't badasses. Like, we are really powerful. And so I want you to consider this session the second panel session, the panel discussion of the evening. And so give me a moment just to introduce to you our very important, very powerful panelists. So everybody put your hand up like this. And they go like this. She's talking about me. You are the next panelist. We want to hear your voice. You know, voice is a really important word in GW4W. What's the acronym in? Vision, inspiration,
opportunity, connection,
and empowerment. Voice is a really powerful thing for us at GW4W. Tonight, we really care about what it is that's going on in your mind as you think about positively disrupting in your spaces. We really want to think about what is it that what's going on with you. So in preparation as panelists, I'd like you to think about 3 things
that you know really is ripe for disruption. I want you to think about these three things. I want you to organise it like this. I want you to think about something that really needs to be disrupted in your personal life. Something that's ready to stop or start or change or shift some way in your personal space, your life, your family, your home. And I'd like you to think also about something that really needs to be shifted, changed, stopped, started in your professional space, so your organisation, your industry, your field. What's not working? What's wrong? What needs to be put right? What's going on in your professional space? Okay? So personal life, professional space, and then I want you to think about the whole world. Like when you think about the whole world, I want you to think, what is it you see happening globally that you just know is wrong? That you just know will not, should not, cannot continue. Okay? So maybe some of you will write that down, some of you will make a mental note of that. But as we go on to have this discussion, I really want you to have those three things in your mind. That as we're thinking about, as we're having this discussion, I want you to personalise it, I want you to make it real. Like these are the things that I care about. These are the things that I want to see shifted. You know, as I was thinking about this panel, I thought about the pandemic and we know all about the stuff that the pandemic did that was awful. But the pandemic really brought a gift to us. The pandemic really put inequality on the map. I mean, we've been talking about inequality and we've been talking about inequity for a very long time. But the pandemic gave us, made it headline. Everybody's been talking about inequality and inequity now, and some of you are here in this room because of that, because of the highlight that we brought to this. And, you know, we know, we don't have to convince anybody in this room particularly that it really is time for change, that something has to shift. And so before we go into the discussion, I just want to read this little tiny story, because the question is, whose job is it? Whose job is it to disrupt? Whose job is it to cause the shift and the change? I want to tell you a little story about 4 people. Their names were everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. There was a really important disruptive work that needed to be done. And everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but instead, nobody did it. Somebody got angry about the fact that nobody did it, because it really was everyone's job to do it. Everybody thought that anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have. Put your hands up in the air like this. Go, it's up to me. We all have to get involved in disruption, and so I want you to be thinking about, I want you to be thinking about, if you're the disruptor in your space, how's it going? Are you well into the throes of it? Are you challenged? Are you struggling to speak up? Do you know what you want to speak up about? How is it going? So we have a few questions. First one is, how do you answer this call to be the disruptor in your space? How do you do this, and how do you do it disruptively and stay healthy, not burn out, not break down, not have your confidence wiped out from underneath you? How are you doing it and managing to hold on to your health? And what does healthy disruption look like to you? Health is a big thing in GW4W. We really believe that if you can stay healthy, then you can lead more effectively. And what are your best tips,
panelists to share with each other. Okay? So that's it from me. I want to know what you're thinking. So who wants to go first?
I can start. What's your name? Where do you come from?
I'm Olivia. Hi guys, my name is Millis and I was invited by Mim because I met her in America a few weeks ago. So at a conference which was about women's health. And
So I'm a scientist. I studied chemistry. Not enough. But what happened this year was that I realized that all the troubles I had in my health, especially gynecological health, every other woman also had. And it was not just an island, it was more, well, everyone, 51% of the population. So I wanted to make that change, so I started my own startup. I called it Boost, it stands for Women Boost, because we're here for women innovation. And so what I want to do is help women so that they know that they can take charge of their own health, they can take charge of their own gynecological health, other than just being dependent on doctors and then not being heard for decades. And you guys maybe know of like endometriosis at the moment, hot topic. 1 in 10 women have it. It takes 8 years for diagnosis. I want to start off with PCOS, just similar statistics.
So what's your biggest challenge?
My biggest challenge at the moment, well, I mean, usually women understand and everyone supports me. Convincing men is a challenge, for sure. Not everyone. I'm actually positively surprised with the support. But that's definitely one of the challenges, I would say, talking to like, investors or men, making them see that this is a problem.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so we're convincing men. Anybody else wanting to convince their male counterparts, allies?
So I guess the challenge for me is I work in international development, so I work with a lot of governments, ministers, presidents, and so on. And a lot of the decisions, the way how the decisions are being made is still, from my point of view, fear-based, reputation-based, control-based, power-based, instead of perhaps a more compassionate, inclusive, really human-centered. And so how I manage that space is that a lot of flexibility and adaptability. Knowing adaptability. Knowing when I need to approach what, how strong and how soft I need to approach different environments, and knowing who my allies are, and knowing when to call their allies for that reinforcement or a particular type of action. But I do balance a lot in terms of external space versus internal space. And I have, I would say, fairly strong boundaries. When I know that my own state of mind is being compromised, I measure my time not in terms of performance, but in terms of stress. So when I know I reach a certain point of stress, I know it's time to take a time out. And I do monitor my nutrition, sort of exercise, sleep, and food closely, because I know when I drip on those, it's an indicator something's being off balance with me. And if I'm off balance, I know that the team is going to be off balance, and I know the work is going to be off balance, and then the impact is going to be off balance. And we cannot compromise on those things. So I sort of connect, I guess, the bigger picture with the smaller, little micro-universes inside of me, and making sure that I can balance all of those in different dimensions.
Yeah. Wow, I love that. Like managing the microcosm within inside. And you talk about ally, you talk about boundaries, you talk about calling out the difference between going in hard and going in soft. I thought it was really powerful. And perhaps at break time we'll be able to pick your brain on how you make that call. Anybody else? What are you thinking?
Whatever you do, don't pick on me. Yeah, I'm here to learn today.
Well, thank you for listening. Anybody else?
Okay, I will share. I know everybody's heard enough from me.
So no, this is not something about the book. I am a writer, as you know, Johan. I'm a journalist as well, so I write a lot of articles. And I call out sexism, racism, and Islamophobia very regularly. And these are the three most sensitive topics in the UK, so which means I get a lot of backlash
I get a lot of nasty comments. The challenge is whataboutism, because whenever I raise concern, especially about gender violence, which I do every few weeks, I hear, but what about this? What about us? So I think we first have to acknowledge this, that when you are trying to positively disrupt something, it's not going to be easy. It is going to be difficult, and you need to prioritize your own mental health. People will be condescending, derogatory, people will make fun of you, people will ridicule you, but I think you just need to take those breaks. So what I do is that I have stopped looking at comments. I don't think that confrontation is important every time. Yes, I'm looking to make a change, but I don't think that everything deserves a response or a retaliation. So when I feel that my mental health is declining, so I will take that break and shut off everything for a few days, and then I'll come back again with renewed vigor. Yeah. So I think that's important.
Really powerful. I think there's a theme coming out from what you're sharing in that you choose your battles, right? You choose what you're going to invest your energy in, and you choose what you're not. I'm wondering how you decide, how you get to that decision about what it is that you're going to back off from, and how you maintain your energy. Anybody else want to contribute to that?
I wasn't going to do this, but I will do it. I literally, as soon as you put up that slide at the beginning, this is the first thing that came to my head. This is nothing to do with work. So I don't know how many people here are with a sports club outside of work, but I'm really into rowing. I'm with a rowing club, and this thing, so I think happens in quite a lot of sports clubs, is favoritism. So if you're not like, you don't walk in and you're this really straight away athletic person, there's a lot of favoritism, so you're kind of put into a group. I've been with this particular club for 2 years, and the thing in a rowing club is you want to get in a really strong boat, but because they've already looked at you and gone, nah, she doesn't look like her, yeah, so we're going to pick her. And it's usually the men actually that dictate, oh, you should talk to that one, blah, blah. And then with picking your battles, only recently have I've literally just disrupted my domain. And what I've done is, so they've just started talking about this lady's 8, and everyone wants to be in an 8, a boat with 8 people, strongest boat. And the only way that I could prove myself, to prove that I'm strong, is get in that bloody rowing machine and show them that I can do it. And it almost killed me. You know what? I smashed it. It worked.
It's a really powerful strategy, isn't it, when you can just not fight, but just show the results. I find that to be a really powerful strategy. There's some more people over here. Just a couple more.
I think 2 things. I think when I think of base tips, one thing that I have learned is really surround yourself with like-minded people that are going to come together for your cause, because sometimes being the lone wolf and thinking you can take on the world is actually not realistic. And I think I had that attitude up until, a while back. But, resonating with a lot of the points, it's not easy when you decide you're going to stand up and push something. And I remember, I think you touched on in terms of financial well-being. Well, 5 years ago I was talking about this within the retail sector, and I was going, if there was one thing you need to be thinking about, it's this. I had no idea at the time that we're going to face a pandemic and a cost of living crisis. However, at the time, what I looked at was all the stories that I was listening to. Women that were trying to get away from abusive relationships, people losing their job, having someone sitting in an IKEA car park dressed up ready to go to work, but didn't have the actual courage to go home to say he had lost his job. Those were the real stories. But then I knew I couldn't take something on so big like that, so I made sure I got my allies. I made sure I went to, the CFOs, I knew the ones that had the biggest voices, and almost convince them. And when you convince them, you work with them and they become your voice. So if I was going to give a best tip is just make sure you surround yourself. And it's also people that have your back, because I think it's so vital. We underestimate, whether it's personally or professionally, that people, you know, you can go into that safe space and you can go, and they give you like 2 minutes and you come back and you're like, right, I'm going to get this shit done now. You know? And I think you need that. You really, really need that. It's not just about yourself. It's about the people around you. The right people will resonate.
You know, Fiona, we could keep going, we could keep talking about this because it is a big topic. We do need to take care of ourselves. At GW4W, we really believe that it's only when you're healthy, only when you are strong, that you can go ahead and be the disruptor. That we really need you to be in your space. The reason that I asked you about your home was because, and your home for your personal life, was because if you don't at the moment feel like you are a disruptor in the professional space, in your personal, in your industry or your field, then start at home. Begin where you are right now, where you have leadership of yourself. Begin there. And if you are thinking that you're too small to make a difference, I want you to know that you haven't yet tried to sleep with a mosquito. I want to leave you with this little anecdote I love by Mr. Fuller. He says it, you never get to change things by fighting existing reality. To change something, you need to build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. I'll leave you with that.
Great, Elizabeth's coming up to introduce our next moderator.
All right, and then this panel, and I'm going to give the waiting for those questions and answer. I'm very honored to introduce our moderator for tonight, Hannah. We have a personal connection. We met through Acumen, an organization that changes the way we tackle poverty. We have us in this room here. Hannah Kim is the founder and lead behavioral scientist of DBIAS Lab, working with other mission-driven organizations, changing organizational and public behaviors to build a better world for all. She's lived in Africa, Asia, Europe, and North America, and through this became acutely aware of various structural inequalities at a global scale and their limits on societal growth, which led her to start DBIAS Lab. She believes that organizations should become change makers and is a proponent of companies fully embracing the scope of diversity and inclusion in their decisions and behaviors. She is also a behavioral science consultant at the World Bank and sits on the advisory board of the Prosperities Project, a nonprofit improving economic mobility of women in the U.S. Hannah, please come on. Thank you. And our panelists, please come as well. Thank you.
The panel that we've all been waiting for, right? So.
Oh, okay, right, I need to come now. Okay, right, I'm off. Yeah, okay. Bye. See you then.
We're not leaving yet. So, while we wait for them to be set up, as a behavior scientist, I just wanted to say, so one important aspect of behavior science is obviously how to de-bias people, how to remove biases in systems and all. But actually, one important part that a lot of people forget about is how to leverage bias, right? Because the thing about bias is unconscious, it's inherent, and I'm sorry to say this, but it's very, very difficult. I wouldn't say impossible, but very difficult to remove. So why am I saying this? Because I think the role of male when it comes to gender bridge building, gender equality is so important. Because we have something called representative bias and in-group bias, meaning we tend to listen to people whom we believe are in so-called in-group, like us, right? So that means female to female, male to male, race, age, could be anything. But as you can imagine, when it comes to gender, it can't just be done by women, we also need men. And it is a fact, it's true that men will listen to other men. It's more likely that men will listen to other men. And therefore, we have 3 men representing today the male allyship. So thank you very much for being here today, being a male ally, and also willing to actually voice up, speak up. And with that, I will make a quick introduction of our panelists. So first, On my left, we have Amol Matre. He's a managing director at GW4W, and he's the global head of intellectual capital, research, and innovation for its health, wealth, and career segment. He is responsible for managing the segment's innovation and research, as well as shaping cross-business solutions and needs for the organization. And he's been leading these changes for over 25 years. That's what he said earlier. He's clearly amazing at his job. Thank you. Well, with a little bit of meditation and coffee, right?
Sometimes.
And we also have Dr. John Forth. He is actually a senior lecturer here at City University. He also sits on the business school's Race Equity and Inclusion Advisory Group. And his research focuses on the ways in which human resource practices shape inequality in the labor market. His most recent work is on the workplace mechanism underlying the gender pay gap and ethnicity pay gap. Welcome. And last but not least, we have Robert Baker. He's a CEO and founder of Potentia Talent, which provides consulting and workshop for companies on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Robert has over 40 years of experience in global HR consulting and led international diversity and inclusion consulting practice at Mercer. He is also a trustee of One Life Voice for Women and Sisters is a global network, and he does a lot of work with male leading groups into men allyship. So, welcome.
And Hannah, can I add something? I'm very proud to say I've actually got in my job description on LinkedIn, Disruptor in Residence in Diversity and Inclusion at edX Business School. And what we're disrupting the global MBA program by bringing in diversity and inclusion. So tomorrow's leaders are already thinking about diversity and inclusion. So I'd like to think, I'm walking the talk.
Thank you. Well, that is great. So welcome again. And we have a lot to talk about with limited time, so I'm just going to jump right in. First question. So where are men? Why aren't there more men allies? Where are they? What do you think more specifically? So where are men? But what do you think is causing this missing in action? Robert, would you like to give a go first?
Well, I think we need to start with why this is so important, and what we need to reflect on is the fact that actually men have a tremendous position of power, as we heard earlier, in terms of the fact that they're 80% of global executives, they're over 60% of people managers. So, in a typical business, men have a huge amount of power, and if we don't get them engaged in this whole thing, then things aren't going to change. So I think, one of the things that's really important is to kind of reflect on that why. And of course, what we've also found from research is that if men do engage in gender equality programs, the whole thing moves faster, right? Okay. So, I think, we talked about women positively disrupting the world. I think if men join in that positive disruption, we all go faster. So I think that's the why is kind of really super important there. But where are the men? So what attracted me to this topic was a LinkedIn post about 9 months ago by a guy called Jean-Michel Monod. And the LinkedIn post says, where are the men? Okay, and he was running a diversity and inclusion workshop. And he said, why is it, in the case when the training's not mandatory, women are interested and show up and men do not? He said, this leaves me more than thoughtful about understanding of the issues by half of humanity. So actually, this is something that I see a lot, is men not turning up to these things. And kind of why they're not showing up often is that they don't know about this, the issues. They're worried about being called out for mistakes that they make. They're worried about feeling blame from women, and they're worried about the opinions of other men who might criticize them, and they're worried about this kind of loss of status. So I think there's a lot of reasons why men don't engage, and I think one of the biggest ones that I hear a lot is what's in it for me. And I mean, it's a shame that often men come at it like that, but it's like, why should I engage with all this? Why am I going to spend the time doing this? So these are the kind of questions that I find come up when I'm talking to men.
Yeah, so, well, to build on that, I mean, the why is clear, isn't it? This is about inclusion. We don't have inclusive workplaces unless we're all part of solving the problem. Why are men missing? I think, sadly, in many organisations, work to promote equality, diversity and inclusion is not what you call promotable activity. Right? It's not the activity that will bring often organisational rewards, and that's a sad fact about many organisations, that the kind of initiatives to improve equality and inclusion don't get recognised, and so then they fall on the shoulders of those people who feel the disadvantage most, and that's a situation of gross unfairness in my book. So I think that's one issue. I think sometimes men don't look hard enough, they don't notice enough of the issues, and partly that's about just asking their female colleagues about the experiences, right? Understanding enough of what might not be immediately in front of their face. So I think there's a strong role here for listening and perspective taking is really critical. Yeah? Understanding the true experiences, and often that is just taking a different eye on the organisational life that you have in meetings, just taking a note and say, well, look, who is speaking here and who's being given the opportunity to speak and how are their views received. And I think when we start to do that, we can make some progress.
So I don't have the answer, but I have a hypothesis. So I think if I don't acknowledge the problem, or I rationalize the evidence to the contrary, or I don't take responsibility. So I don't acknowledge the problem because I don't believe that women are equal to men, so I don't have to do anything. I rationalize the problem because I see women make less money than men, depending on what the data says, but I think it's mostly because women take time off from work and take on caregiving responsibilities, so of course that's going to happen, and therefore I don't worry about the problem. Or the third one is I've always thought that I've never made the distinction between men and women. I treat men and women equally. I wish more men were like me. I don't take responsibility. So in all these three examples, I think men just ignore, for different reasons, the problem, or don't internalize the problem, and therefore they don't show up, or they don't take any action. And I think it's up to us, all of us, to challenge those three behaviors. I'm sure there are multiple nuances of those, but I thought, as I was thinking about this, I thought there could be these three that sort of majorly represent those behaviors.
Thank you. No, I think all those answers were really fantastic, and really appreciate the honesty in your answers as well. And just quick summary would be, I think number one is just pure ignorance and not noticing things, perhaps not being aware of it intentionally or unintentionally. Second would be systemic issue, right? Like organization set up in such a way where it doesn't matter enough yet. Third thing is, it seems like not enough incentive. Simply changing behavior is difficult, and without incentive, why should I? Right? That could be a mentality as well.
Well, and Hannah, that's why, for example, I did some research around the benefits for men, because what I realised that I got huge amounts of benefits from engaging in gender equality. So I thought if I could reach out to other men that have worked in this space as well, we could understand what benefits they're seeing, and then we could, publish the research, and men could find out that actually there are men already in this space doing great stuff and getting benefits from it. So that's kind of what I've been engaged in. Well, and the two key benefits really that we've seen are actually that 97% of the men that we surveyed said it actually made them a better human being and a better leader from engaging in gender equality. And 80% of them had said it'd been better for their business as well, their business involvement. So, I mean, those to me were kind of really powerful headlines, and there were other things too, but those were kind of two of the key things.
Yeah. I agree. Of course, when I say it, they say, well, of course you agree, because you are a female of color, so, But again, that's why, just to re-emphasize, it's important that you three are here speaking about this. It's so much more powerful when it comes from you. So now move on to next question. So having discussed why it's so hard to find male allies and why there isn't enough incentives and so on, the three of you, how did you become an ally? Was there a specific trigger point in your life or in your line of work that kind of made you into an ally? And through this experience, if you could just elaborate a little bit on how it benefited you or your family or your colleagues in your community.
So, shall I go first?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So, I grew up in a fairly traditional home in India. My mother was a stay-at-home mom, and my father worked as a PR executive at an airlines. He would come home, my mom would make him snacks, we all would eat together, my mom would make dinner. I had a friend of mine, my best friend, both his parents were economists. They would go to work together, they would teach at the university, they would come home, they would cook together. Very different experiences. However, never occurred to me that somehow my mother was less equal than my friend's mother, or my mother was less equal than my father. I don't know why, it just never occurred to me. The advantage, as I see it, you asked the question, how has that influenced my thinking? It's been quite helpful actually, because I do not consider choices people make in terms of where colleagues make, in terms of where they work, what kind of work they do, how do they do it, and when do they do it. Because I respect all different choices people make. Now, in theory, this is wonderful. I can pat myself on the back and say, oh, this is great, I'm a good man. There's a fundamental problem with this. The availability of choice to do different things is underpinned by financial security. And if you don't have financial security, then you don't have choices. And this is particularly problematic for women, right? And therefore, the stuff that we're talking about of financial, in fact, what your team is doing in terms of financial well-being of women and financial equality and what that means and what we all have to do to help women achieve that is of critical importance, because that sort of underpins the rest of it.
Absolutely, thank you. And I think that kind of would be a good way into, John, your research, right? Because your research is into gender pay gap.
Yeah, so it's always been a research interest of mine, wage inequality, why people earn different amounts in the labour market. And so I was interested by Amol's response earlier, because he was talking about the way in which we can maybe explain away the gender wage gap. We say, oh no, it's all due to this and it's all due to that, it's a measurement problem, all the so on and so forth. And in the course of my research, it's become very clearly obvious to me that it's not all about measurement and you can't explain it away. Bias exists in organisations, and it's much more prevalent than most of us would like to believe. Okay, and so I've become convinced of that as I've tried to dig into the data over the course of my career. And then beyond that, it's also very tempting to think that, okay, bias might exist and it may be very prevalent, but it's over there. It's not here in my team or in my organisation. And what I've come to realise is actually it's there in every organisation. Organisations I've worked in, I've started to hear the stories of colleagues where they can relay the personal accounts of how it's affected them. People who've been paid less than their colleague because they're a woman, or have been ignored or overlooked in certain work situations because of their gender. And so that's been the prompt really for me to think, okay, well, I have got a little bit of expertise and maybe I can bring that to the table. I do understand a little bit about the dynamics of organisations and how bias arises, and so maybe there's something that I can interject into those conversations. That maybe goes a little bit beyond standard diversity training, which we know doesn't cut the mustard.
And I've got to say, actually, as a non-executive director of a gender pay gap company, a company that actually calculates gender pay gaps, it's really fascinating because the UK has had legislation about this. Companies over 250 employees or more have to publish their gender pay gap. And so you're looking at it and thinking, like, why do these gender pay gaps exist? And when we look at it, what we see is it's caused a huge amount by representation, i.e. there aren't enough women in the top paying positions. Women are predominantly, you know, in the lower paying positions. So kind of it's a question, if we can get more women into leadership, then, you know, we get to the 50-50, we're hopefully going to see some of that gender pay gap disappear. But I mean, what got me into this whole sphere, actually, to be honest, was single parenting. Because I got divorced when my kids were relatively young, and I decided that I was going to try and do the best that I could as a father to you know, spend time with them, do things that I needed to do with them, take them to school, go to, you know, meetings with teachers, take my son was on the autistic spectrum, taking him to hospital appointments and stuff like that. And I decided to try and do all of that in my consulting career as well. And it was a real bloody challenge, frankly. And I thought, you know what? I'm just experiencing what women experience every day. So what am I moaning about? You know, it was a bit tough sometimes. I'd take the kids to school in the morning, and then all the mums would go off for coffee, and I'd have to go to work. And it didn't seem fair. But you know, that's just a small point, really. But I think that really highlighted to me that actually, you know, there is a double shift for women. There is a different standard, and you know, so I think as a male ally, I've got to stand up and be counted in that.
Amazing. And all three of you, I think the common aspect or element in the stories is really personal experience. It seems like, you know, family, work. You've seen other women, you could relate to those women, and that kind of naturally over time made you become an ally. So that just, you know, resonates with me how important it is for men and women to be aware, you know, going back to earlier points that we discussed today, being aware of such things, reflecting perspectives. So, yeah, thank you for sharing this. Yes.
We should start a startup called Walking in Women's Shoes. We'll actually let men walk in women's shoes.
Do you want to start now? I like it, I love it, yeah.
There's another version of that, which is actually, we did this thing at Mercer with virtual reality. We recorded microaggressions in a meeting from a woman's perspective, and then we made men put the VR headset on and experience as it would be as a woman, and it was tremendously revealing. And the men got a real aha moment. So, I mean, you can walk in shoes, but yeah, stick the VR headset on, experience it for yourself, and you know, most men were super, you know, really shocked.
Yes, and
so I was literally talking about walking in women's shoes, and you're talking about VR.
Yeah,
yeah.
You look better in red pumps than me, right?
Back in that's no, it's a really, really good idea.
Well, you know, whether actually walking in women's shoes or figuratively or VR, I really like the idea. And also just going quickly touching on the gender pay gap. Yes, please figure it out because I want more money. I need more money. So, yeah. If you could reduce that 132 years to something like 2 years, that would be great.
Well, we talked earlier about the broken line, and that's really a critical part in the whole of this story. So some of my research looks at how the gender pay gap varies across different teams, and to what extent it depends on the gender of the manager, right? And as you'd expect, the gender pay gap is smaller in teams that are managed by women, it's larger when those teams are managed by men, and you can see the clear correlation. And a large part of that, I think, is about discretionary decision making. Yeah. How individual managers make decisions around pay, promotion, investing in people, training, and so on. And so part of the solution here is finding organisational initiatives which squeeze out some of that discretion when it might be appropriate, and help people to make good decisions around those things which are fair.
No, really, really good point. And I think also I will ask the last question because I think I want really good long answers from all three of you. And and I think that John, you will touch on this perhaps in this question, and that question is actually the two parts. So one part is, what does allyship mean to you in one word, a new one? And following that, please share an action item that you would leave with the audience tonight that will help them build an allyship in their organizations, like at work or in their communities. So just a quick reminder, yeah, one word, what allyship means to you, and after that, like an action step that you would advise the audience tonight that would help build allyship in their organizations or communities.
I start. Action is the word, but you weren't expecting me just to say one word, were you? It's basically, okay.
Go ahead.
But action, I think, and persistence, because basically going gets tough. Somebody mentioned that earlier, I think Vera mentioned that, you know, so keeping going, taking action, and then keep it. And then the one thing I think we could do to encourage men to, you know, or for us all to take this forward, is to, it's International Men's Day on the 19th of November. Let's try and use that in a positive way to reinforce what we need from men to support women in this space.
So, in a word, I mean, the word that comes to me is around community. I see workplaces as communities. Okay? They're communities of people who exist together and try and change the world in a certain way. And so allyship is very much about seeing us, I think, as communities of people working together to meet a bigger cause. What could we do? I think for us as men, it's very much about challenging ourselves, okay? And just taking a long, hard look at each one of us, actually, and particularly myself, challenging myself around the way that I inhabit certain roles. I think one particular issue that's on my heart at the moment is the intersection of gender and age. I'm a fairly old guy now, but in the workplace, how do I interact in particular with women who are younger than me, who may have fantastic expertise, but often I think the intersection of gender and age is a particularly dangerous area, how older men interact with younger women in the workplace. So I think that's one thing I would like us as men to consider and challenge ourselves on that particular issue as we go away, because I think it's a particularly risky area in organisations.
We'll leave that for another time.
I'm uncomfortable with that observation because I have a bunch of colleagues here looking at me angrily. So I can't be brave. So I'm just too. I'm gonna say acknowledge and act. So that's what I think I would say. And there are some examples, and I think this is something that companies can do, since most of our work is related to advising companies, so I'm going to think of it from that perspective. So I think companies need to do a lot more in terms of managing unconscious bias and acknowledging unconscious bias and actually putting in programs to actually address unconscious bias. So that's one. The second thing I think about is managers evaluating performance. And I agree with what you said about women managers versus male managers. And I think that's particularly important as we get into remote work, flexible work, because I think women generally do tend to take on more responsibility, caregiving responsibilities, and therefore are more likely to avail themselves to flexible work models than men do. And I think we must make sure that managers are evaluating performance based on output and not based on visibility. And that's absolutely fundamental. Companies have to do that. The third thing is companies have to have programs to accelerate re-entry when women take breaks. For caregiving responsibility, for children, whatever the case may be. And it's not about protecting jobs, because we have good laws to do that, at least in most of the countries, but it is about accelerating the career progression when women come back to work, right? And then, of course, we talk about caregiving, leave policies and leave policies and pay programs to make sure that caregiving responsibilities are addressed is critical, because if we don't do any of this, purely from a business perspective, we're increasingly going to see more women leaving the workforce. And that problem is that is going to affect the diversity and productivity, because half the women are consumers of the companies of this world, and therefore if we do not have women representation, then there's going to be a business challenge that I think people need to acknowledge.
But that's already happening. I mean, Lean In produced, did you read the Lean In report yesterday, the McKinsey report? Women are leaving the workforce, senior women are leaving the workforce in droves, because they haven't got the flexibility, there isn't fairness, it is an inclusive environment. So it's already happening, and if companies want to get ahead of this and actually want to retain women, then they've got to do something about that. So I think we've actually got a very real and present danger there. And just one other thing I think to say, I think men are what we can do to bridge this generation gap you were mentioning, John. I think is actually we could be reverse mentored by younger women. So I'm reverse mentored by a millennial woman, and it's really interesting to get her perspective on how I approach the world and my performance. And I mean, she probably thinks I'm old, male, pale and stale, but you know, it's interesting anyway, it's fun to do that.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I think there's still so much to uncover, and I would love to continue this conversation, but we are running out of time. But maybe we can open the floor for 2 questions, maybe it's okay? 1 question?
One,
okay, sorry, 1 question. Who's so lucky? Yes?
A lot of what we're hearing about this evening, to me feels like it's about fairness and ethics and the benefits to individuals for more equality. And I'm wondering, in terms of business outcomes, is there evidence that businesses are more successful when there is more gender equality? And if there is that evidence, why are all businesses not pushing it?
But I honestly think that is the rationalization of the evidence that I talked about. Yeah. Because and we're talking about this earlier, the number of decisions that organizations make based on emotional responses of their leaders is staggering, right? Non-data driven decisions. So you can have as much data staring you in the face. If you are very, very good at rationalizing the decisions that you're making, the emotional decisions you're making by discounting the data that doesn't resonate with the hypothesis and accentuating the data that somehow resonates with the hypothesis, that becomes a problem. And then the second thing is, and I've been thinking about this, and maybe it's true or not, but I think there is an increasing partisanship in our thought models because of social media algorithms that essentially create separation of ideas and ideologies, and therefore increasingly it's really difficult for us to make decisions on data if we're selective about it and the data that we're receiving is best fed based on our hypothesis. I totally made that up. I'm going to have to go back and do research to make it not mine, but I think that sounds like a reasonable, let's call it a hypothesis. And not an answer to your question.
Do you have a game plan as allies? Do you have a game plan to tackle that resistance to the evidence as allies?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, firstly, I think what I would say is a lot of these guys don't really believe the evidence. I mean, you put the evidence in front of them and they still don't believe it because it doesn't chime with their worldview, okay? The second thing is, if you really want to get their attention, you say, what's going on with your business? What are your customers saying? For example, I find the way to engage C-suite people is to about what their customers are doing and how they're going to lose customers if they don't engage with this, how they can't attract the right talent because they don't appeal to a diverse range of talent. So you've got to find their pain points basically and find out what's really going wrong. And the biggest challenge is when an organisation says, well, we've been doing really well up to now without doing any of this diversity stuff, why should we change? And then you've really got to think, okay, well, you might have done well, okay up to now, but what about the next 5 years? The world is changing dramatically and you're not coping with it.
I think behavioral economics plays a lot of role in this discussion. You should answer that question instead of us. You have better answers.
I'll say something heretical on this point and then I'll qualify it, okay? My reading of the research is that the business case is not entirely convincing, okay? That often a lot of the business case type stories that are put forward are based on simple correlations which show that the companies who are doing a lot in this area just happen to be profitable. That's not causation, okay? My reading of the research is that when you dig into it, the business returns may be there, but actually they're often entirely contingent on the particular business situation you're in. So actually general messages about business cases, I don't personally think are entirely helpful. Because often the response you'll get from a CEO will be, well, that's okay for them, but it's not going to apply here. So actually business cases have to be made in their own contexts, I think, in order to be convincing. So in some senses, I think the big headlines you often see on the business cases may do a little bit of a disservice, because they sometimes over-egg the story. But I think a business case can often be made. And there is always a moral case. So don't let's forget that. Would be where I'd finish it.
Thank you so much. Yes, I have to end here, otherwise I'm gonna get screwed up by the organizer. But I think I personally, as a behavior scientist, I also have a lot to say about this, but I could save that for my LinkedIn post. So follow us, quick PR. But yes, thank you so much. All your points were very insightful, very empowering, and I hope you continue this another time. So thank you.
All right, so we're heading into our last session. And to set the tone for our fireside chat, I thought I'd open with a poem. When I started my career, I asked for advice on how to grow into leadership. The reply, tie your hair back, wear trousers, less blonde. And I've had a lot of coaching, deepen my voice, less smiling, stronger body language, be more masculine. Every female leader will likely have received at least one instance where they had feedback on their look or a device to pull back on femininity to advance. So can leadership be female and be feminine? Leadership can be female and it can be feminine. It can be graceful and beautiful. It can be thoughtful and persuasive. It can be high fashion and pedicures. It can be laughter and empathy. It can be global with coordinating luggage. It can be whatever you want it to be. There is no one way to be a leader. So I'd like to welcome Mim to the stage. So Mim, you put a spotlight on all the great work that others are doing. And tonight, we get the rare opportunity to reverse the spotlight and put it on you. So let's reflect on your leadership. What are the themes that have driven you through your life and your career?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm kind of a unicorn. I've been called a unicorn many times in my life because I had the great privilege really of moving around and being exposed to many, many cultures at a very early age. But I was thinking about this question when we talked about it. One of the most impactful things happened to me when I was 12 years old. So I'm a little older than most of you in the room, but my girlfriend was an amazing athlete, great basketball player. I mean, every kid, every boy, didn't matter. And yet, there was no girls' basketball team. That was a long time ago. And I didn't think that was fair. And so I went home to Mom and I said, I don't understand, Jesse's so good. Like, why isn't there something? Well, why don't you ask about it? So we did. Well, there's no money. There's no money. We have a boys team, but there's just no money for a girls team. And I went home again, and I said, Mom, this is crazy, I don't understand. And she said, well, what do you want to do about it? And I was like, well, what can we do about it at 12? And so she introduced me to petitions. And this is what a petition is, this is how you write it, and this is what you're going to need to do. It doesn't mean you're going to win. But if you believe in this, go out and try. And so I rallied my friends. I was told by many teachers, because we also try to get teachers to sign, this is crazy. Why are you even trying to do this? It just so happened that there was legislation that had recently been passed as a little girl. I didn't know that. And I will never forget, we got all these signatures, we put it in, apparently it went to the school board, I was not there for that. And the school bus came back from a trip, and they announced, well, the girls can come and try out for the basketball team. So Jessie tried out, and she played first string. She was better than anybody else on that team, and I will never forget. I get emotional about it because you can make change, and you can do it for someone else, and it's about all of us. And I think we forget about that. We get so caught up in our own lives. And it wasn't just for her, it's now the next little girl that looks at her. It's the boys that finally accepted her and said, holy moly, she really is this good. Now, it took a while for them to get to that point, but it taught me that change can happen. Doesn't mean you're gonna win when you go into the fight, but that's the goal. That's that goal, to see that person shine. I can't imagine, if you are a leader, that there is any better thing that you can do in your career than helping someone else be at their best. Help them see their talents and grow. And that is what I've carried through most of my career. How do you see that person wholly? Listen to them. Introvert, extrovert. I love that that was brought up because I don't think we talk about that enough. Ageism. I've had friends that were 80, 90 when I was in my 30s, and I have friends now, the little kids in my neighborhood that I talk to. Getting to know people as a leader
and opening up and being vulnerable. And I love Amanda. We're all weird, okay? Let's just be honest about this. One of the best things I ever, pieces of advice I ever got is that there really are no normal people. Those are just people you don't know well. So at the same time, each of us, I truly believe, has a unique gift to bring into the world. And so at a manager or leader at every level, it's really your job to help bring that out in others. And I had so many amazing role models in my life that I am deeply grateful for. I will call out Percy Fairbairn. She was one of the first women, I think she was the first woman to ever hold a leadership position at IBM. I had the great privilege to work under her as a very young person at the benefits team at Union Pacific at the corporate offices. The graciousness and decisiveness. She was a stylish dresser, I will absolutely say that, but compassionate. And it was so amazing to see this in a very, very difficult working environment. So I am continue to learn, and I think the leaders that I admire the most are those that empower their teams, every member of their teams, to be at their best.
And you've built an entire organization around your mission, which is amplifying the voices of women and diverse women and finding those unique points and perspectives through data, but then making them real and making them bigger. So talk to me a little bit about how did you come up with GW4W? What was your driver? How did you translate this passion that you've had since you were 12 into building this organization?
Go to a lot of conferences, get to hear a lot of these conversations, and I'm, again, very grateful for that. But it was at, specifically, there's a program called SHINE at Harvard School of Public Health. And it's specifically focused on this intersection between environmental sustainability and human sustainability. There's a lot of really interesting leaders there, brought fantastic think tank conversations. But a bunch of us, all women, went out to dinner during that event, and some of us researchers, some of us business people, some of us politicians, some of us, society, nonprofit leaders, and we don't have pay equity, and really it was, we looked at each other and said, we're all smart women. Are we gonna complain about it? Or are we gonna try and figure out why? I mean, pay equity has been talked about. And I've done it at other events. There is a wonderful picture from 1910, woman, equal pay for equal work. Okay, where are we? Why does it take this long? And so our question was, scientifically, data-driven, what are we missing? What piece are we missing? And we've touched a little bit on this, but our research, and if you look over there, there's a lovely mind map at the bottom of that. Those are all different buckets of research that we had our researchers look into, because what we wanted to understand was what's happening behind that. And this is really where GW4W put their stake in the ground. Whether you're talking about women's health and well-being issues, whether it's mental health, whether we're talking about substance abuse, anything that from a fertility perspective, ageism, all of that. And then there's the other side of the fence. We have to produce twice as much information to get buy-in for our projects in most organizations, and that's just data. It is actually better if somebody advocates for you to get a raise than you going in and advocating for yourself. I hate to tell you that, but that's what the data tells us right now. But what's sitting really underneath all of this? And so, as no surprise, and we heard this over and over again, financial stability. How does a woman take care of her family and her career if she's in an abusive situation and is not making enough money to actually move out of that situation? Right? We think about this sometimes just at this very high level, but there are leaders at every level in organizations. And it was mentioned too, you start doing caregiving. I've seen women go through all that wonderful savings because mom or dad didn't have enough money, and we are not talking about that. And they will never be able to retire. So there are pieces of the puzzle out here from a financial perspective that we need to really hone in on. Divorce, I know in the United States, your credit score gets slammed, and most young women have no idea. So there is that piece, but it is deeply connected to caregiving, which has been mentioned many times. And I am, as somebody who has taken care of my father end of life, my stepfather end of life, Been there for my father-in-law's passing. I took care of my mother-in-law, all while managing this and a consulting career. I can tell you personally what it's like to be giving somebody morphine and trying to get through a PowerPoint presentation. And that is a reality. We have to look at this caregiving piece because as women, we're told, and we are, we're very giving, we're brought up this way. What we don't do is put our own mask on first, too often. But you give, oh, you can just do a little bit more. Well, this, I've heard this over and over and over from top female leaders that will not say it publicly. I'm burnt out, I can't do this anymore. And we lose their talent. They're gone. The businesses lose innovation, although their ideas are now out the window. And so these two pieces, caregiving and financial stability, when you connect those, it influences how we show up as leaders, but also how we're viewed as leaders. And this is what GW4W is here. We're not here to compete with any other women's organizations. We love HBA, we love UN Women, and we love all of them. But we need to be talking about how we protect our health and well-being, mental, physical, financial, over the courses of our careers, so we can be these positive disruptors. The world needs us to be at our best. And it is not easy. We're in a very, very big influx of so many different pieces of the puzzle that are thrown at us. We've got wars, and and it is, I mean, it really is that big of a context. We're at an inflection point in the world, and we need all the best leaders at their best at the table. And so we want you to learn how to protect your health and well-being. We want you to be able to be resilient enough to make it through crisis, change, and be those leaders that lead you forward. I will tell you this, and this is not political. I'm just going to say it flat out, because I know, but I watched the video, and I don't know, again, we've watched a lot more of this in the US, but they showed a video of Nancy Pelosi. Did anybody see this? So this is a video right after they stormed the Capitol. There are people with guns and everything else. The calm blew me away. If you want to go see what real, amazing female leadership is, I can't imagine coming out of a Capitol building know that they're chasing you. And yet, she knew what she had to do. She was so grounded in her purpose and who she is. I encourage you to go and look at that. It was very inspirational to me. And that woman is how old? Yeah, she's 80 years old. So this also now is this intersection with ageism. Whether you're a leader at 22 or 35 or 45 or 65 or hopefully 80, we all have something to bring to the table and contribute. We can't do that if we are not healthy. So that is why we are here and very passionate about saying, please think about this for yourself. Don't ignore your health.
Brilliant. And so how do we in the room help support GW4W and the cause that you've created and inspired in all of us through the evening?
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you for asking. One of the things, first become a member. Please become a member. It is a very low cost. We did that on purpose. If you're a student, you can join us for the equivalent of like 10 US dollars, seriously, because we need people at all socioeconomic levels. If you are a corporation, please come join us, because one of the things that we want to pilot now, and this is based in neurobehavioral science, is bring onto college campuses a 3-part training. Before women go into the workplace, here are all the potential roadblocks. We look at it through a diversity lens. We want you to be prepared from a health and well-being perspective. We want to follow that data, and we want to continue to improve that. So it's physical and mental health, it's financial health, and then it's you building your own roadmap for what's best for you. Not written in stone, but at least something to take forward. And please come to our events. Add your voice. Our think tanks, give us ideas. We're here to get people connected and share this. We are going to take this video and we're going to put it out to a lot of people. We're going to put it in front of people, and we're going to continue to do that. We have to accelerate change. It's time. So join us, be a part of making a healthier, vision of what leadership can be. Join us and let's talk more intensively about gender bridge building, not just allyship, because it does benefit all of us. And join us because I think we all want a healthier, more sustainable world. And as Dion said, it's about us, all of us. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here with us this evening. We'll give you a little bit more and a couple pictures about who we are, but I also just want to say that you are positive disruptors just by being here. And this sense of being inclusive and sharing voices is what can make the change that we need to see. I'm going to do just a couple of quickies so you know a little bit more about us. Voice is important to us. This is a little bit different than what you normally see. We are very big on cross-disciplinary and cross-generational conversations. Very, very focused on intentionally inviting diverse people in. We have to share action steps, so I encourage you that if you hear of something that's working, share it. If we keep these in silos and somebody just says, this is just my thing and I'm going to solve what Dion said, no one person's going to solve all of this. The faster we can share things that actually work, the faster we can make change. Research, research, research. Lesson learns, I'm sorry to say, do not change behavior. Coming out of the health and well-being benefit space for many, many years, I can tell you that firsthand. So we need everything that we do to truly have some science and data behind it if we're truly going to make this. And we want to also, if you know of companies that have made real progress, measurable progress, let us know. We want to get the word out, we want to go talk to them, and we want to let others know about it. And I'm talking about measurable, so I'm going to give you an example. Nest UK, anybody familiar with Nest UK? Okay, they measured women in leadership 5 levels down, 20%. They said in 2 years it will be 30%. 30%. They beat that number. That's what we want to see, not 0.5. I'm sorry, I'm a little tired of cheering on something that really, from a business perspective, doesn't make a lot of sense. We've been around the world, we've done 45 events. You will meet extraordinary people. I am truly blessed to have met people from around the world, literally, that are joining together and saying, let's make this change. These are all our events, these are all people that have been kind enough to share their voice with us. And there's a lot of these. If anybody wants these papers, they are research-based. The first one is specifically about that caregiving. Happy to share it. I promise you, it is not a scientific document. We wrote it for corporations, but it is completely cited. The Gender Think Tank Proceedings is a very interesting document, and we're moving forward. We are getting out there. We're going to be doing unsummit summits. It's more of you sharing your voice, so please reach out to us about that. But nothing happens without support, and so I really want to thank, please join me in a round of applause for our panelists, for our moderators, for the incredible information that they shared. We are always grateful to WTW that has partnered with us in the past. Obviously to the university here for giving us the space. Artisan Shipping and Activity Care helped support this financially. And I'm going to turn it back over to Amanda for a few more thank yous.
Perfect. So thank you again, WTW, for sponsoring the event. I want to specifically call out Rachel, Amal, Carolyn, Nick, Tammy, and WTW attendees. Thank you for not coming at us with too hard questions. I would like to thank so WTW has a fantastic partnership with the M&A Research Center at Bayes Business School. So Scott and Nag do fantastic work with us. I want to thank our Bayes professors in management, so William, who is here, John, Carolyn, Nick, and Hans, and of course, I'd like to thank our ever gracious hostess, Lynn.
Wonderful team that helped put this together to please come up. Dion, Elizabeth, yeah. And who you don't see here, I also, because we're on video, I also want to send a shout out to my co-partner, Nancy Ford and Lynn Davis, that are part of our core team. We want to send out our best to all those that were sick and could not join us, which there were 5 people that we've swapped out over the past week and a half. So please go take care of yourselves, because clearly there's something going on. And it is time. It is time to be disruptive. It is time to step into that power and make this change. And it doesn't happen without amazing partners, diverse voices. We stand together to be disruptive, positively disruptive. So thank you for being with us. Please join us for some wine and a toast. Yeah, we even have wine. We are big on that too, because we also want to celebrate you. Each and every one of you is clearly doing something for someone and hopefully for yourself. And so it's a way to toast and honor all of you for the great work that you are doing. Thank you for being with us this evening.